Episode 35, Innovator, Disruptor, the former Vice Chair of GE, Beth Comstock. Welcome to The Art of Excellence, a show about people doing extraordinary things in their lives. I'm your host, Glenn Zweig. Thanks for joining me. My guest today is Beth Comstock. Beth spent over 25 years at GE, where she was a vice chair, a CEO of business innovations, and chief marketing officer, among many other roles. She's been featured in the New York Times, Forbes, Fortune, and Fast Company, and has been named to the Fortune and Forbes lists of the world's most powerful women. Her new book is titled Imagine It Forward: Courage, Creativity, and the Power of Change. Beth, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So I'd like to start with maybe a somewhat painful chapter in your past. You talk pretty openly in the book about your divorce, I guess as an inflection point, that prior to the divorce, you had always lived your life by someone else's narrative, but you came to realize the huge gap between the story you were expected to follow and the life you really wanted to live. So what was this life that others expected of you, and what is it you really wanted out of life?
Well, I think I grew up in a small town. I loved it. I had a great upbringing, but I was a small town good girl. I was, everything was, done, to protect your reputation and do everything really well and, get good grades, join all the right clubs. I went off, to the College of William and Mary in my home state and, was a joiner. I just kind of followed along a path of what was expected. And then I found myself at 24, married and with a new baby, and saying, well, wow, this isn't the story I really want my life to be. I didn't exactly know I wanted it to be. I mean, there were career things I wanted to do because my career was just taking off. I was interested in being a journalist at that time. But I just had this feeling that this is not the path that's meant for me, that's meant to tell, I wanted to get out and see the world. I wanted to kind of try new things and sort of go beyond what I had known. So it was pretty vague, to be honest.
So it was more you knew what you didn't want as opposed to knowing what you really wanted.
Yeah, exactly. And knowing that I had aspirations for my life, that there were things I wanted to do. Keep in mind, at that stage, my career was just taking off too. I hadn't really developed a strategic plan for my life. I hadn't set myself down. Certainly I hadn't set my husband down and said, what are we doing together? What are we trying to create? We got married, we were in love, and, that's what one did. But I didn't ask myself tough questions. I didn't think about what the future was going to be. And I use it to start my book, which is a very different way to start a business book. But, I use it because it was this pivotal moment for me. And I often find in moments of change, when you're struggling with something, it's often good to go back to those times when you had to confront something in the past. And you say to yourself, see, you did that. What did you learn? What were you able to do? And at that point in my life, I just knew I wanted to move forward. I just had to make it work. So I picked a path and I just had to make it work. Whatever work meant, I just had to be committed to it. So that's why I use that story, because to me it was incredibly pivotal.
So reflecting upon leaving for this new job at NBC, you wrote, I've come to understand that charging into the unknown, optimistically and courageously, with all flags flying, is a skill, one that needs to be developed and nurtured rather than quashed. So you're saying that risk-taking is actually a skill that can be learned?
Yeah, I think it is. I actually, it's one of the reasons I wrote I wrote the book. I'm worried. I think in business today, we actually think we can avoid risk. We've signed up for a lot of magical thinking. And one, you can't, especially in the volatility of the world we have today. Partly you just have to do it. I talk a lot about giving yourself permission. So that was a huge permission step for me to take. And then willingly put myself in a path that was very risky. I did not know I would be good at that, at anything. I was putting my young daughter at risk in that. I chose a lot of big risk in that path. And I had no choice, but as I said earlier, to work it out. So yeah, what does it mean to figure your way through risk? I think it's a lot of just putting yourself in that path, being adaptable, pretty quickly testing things when you're realizing this path isn't going to work, you go to another path. But too often we overthink these things. We want things to be perfect. We want to already know the answer. And we don't move forward unless we have some sort of guarantee. That doesn't work in today's world, I don't think.
Well, so another quote of yours is you say that most of us fear losing what we have more than we desire winning something we don't have. And I guess in a nutshell, that explains why there are so few true change agents like you in the world, or at least in the corporate world.
Well, I think in the corporate world, it's really hard because, think of all the pressures that people have. There's certainly short-term Wall Street pressures for a public company, customer pressures, team pressure. It's just so much easier not to take the risk. It's just so much easier to just say, why risk it? I'm just going to play it safe. But how does progress happen unless you try something new? I really worry about that in our companies because I think we kid ourselves that a safe path is somehow going to lead to progress. And I defy anyone to find a story of a successful company, a team that didn't risk something to get where they are. And it's often those that we like the most, right? It's the drama of it. The swashbuckling entrepreneur hero who risked everything, 40 years, people telling him he was an idiot. But he kept pursuing it. We end up loving those stories, yet somehow we can't see our way to be that on a small scale. I'm not suggesting everybody has to go be a swashbuckling Jeff Bezos. In fact, the opposite. I think we need more entrepreneurs in our companies taking the smaller risks to get things done.
Well, let's dig into this risk-taking for a bit at GE. One of the boldest things you did fairly early on, and frankly could have cost you your job, was the Statue of Liberty print ad campaign in the wake of 9/11. So what was that campaign all about? Why was it so controversial internally?
Yeah, and I will put it in context by saying obviously the risk was relevant to the job I had and the company I worked for. But obviously 9/11 was a huge shock, especially at GE. Jack Welch had just retired. Jeff Immelt had come in as the new CEO. And in one, horrific incident, our business was really challenged. The aviation business, the financial market business, there were a lot of challenges, and GE was trying to figure out what it could do to help. We lost some employees. That was the biggest challenge of all. And everybody was just scared. And so at the time, part of my job was to oversee advertising, and I just felt the frustration and anxiety that our customers and our employees felt. And so knowing what I know how to do, I said, well, maybe we should do an ad. Well, of course, it was really not a good time to do an ad. In fact, most of the TV networks were not running ads because they didn't want to monetize the news. But I called up the ad agency BBDO, who had been our agency for decades, and said, what would a print ad look like to really kind of tap into the spirit that people want that spirit to move forward. And, people thought it was a dumb idea. And, I got some dumb ideas to do it. I mean, some of the creative was not very good. And hidden at the bottom of the stack from the agency was this amazing drawing, this illustration of Lady Liberty stepping off her pedestal, kind of like rolling up her sleeves to get to work. And it was that's it. They almost hit it because they're oh, that's too weird. And so I went to Jeff Immelt. We were very new working together. And I said, I think we have to do this ad. I think it's a way, not about GE, but it's a message brought to GE to kind of channel the zeitgeist right now to say, we got work to do. Let's do what we always do in these times, work together and move forward. And so he's okay, go for it. And we got a lot of internal grief, why would we stick our neck out? What would we do? Again, I was early in my time working with him, risk relative to the job I was in. And I was up half that night oh my God, this was really stupid. The next morning it was in most of the major newspapers, and employees were really proud. Our customers were like, this is really the mood we wanted to say. It wasn't about GE. It was about GE channeled their voice. And for me, the most proud thing about it was when we went, I actually, later that day, I went with Jeff Immelt to Ground Zero because we had donated some money for the families. And we were kind of walking the New York Stock, or it would have been the New York Stock Exchange when it reopened. And we were walking the floor, and the traders had the ad taped on their kiosks. And I felt really proud of GE for kind of sticking its neck out to express a sentiment. And it wasn't about GE. And so my lesson there is, a lot of people will tell you it's not right. And it could have the work could have been bad. It could have been looked at as self-promotional if we hadn't done it in the right way. But know your story, know your strategy. What are you trying to do? And know you're going to stay up half the night sweating it because that's what risk is.
Well, the country was paralyzed at the time. No one knew what to do. And someone had to be the one to stick their neck out. And that's what I call leadership.
Yeah, well, it's a small example. It's not like, we didn't launch a new GE business.
But it's symbolic, though.
Yeah, it was symbolic. That's why I put it in the book, because it was important for me, my relationship with Jeff. I remember some of the feedback, because we showed it to some of the business leaders internally, and one of them was like, that looks like Lady John Wayne. And, people were sort of, you could feel their fear. And I guess that's a lot of what I'm trying to do with the book is if you're trying to grab change and lead to something better in your company, what you have to realize is that everybody's afraid. You're afraid. They're afraid. They're afraid of looking stupid. They're afraid of pissing off somebody, losing a customer. So I didn't appreciate that then, but I think you need to listen to those fears. You can't dismiss them. So, okay, yeah, she kind of did look like Lady John Wayne, but that was kind of the moment we wanted at that point. We wanted toughness. So you have to listen, but you have to decide, is this relevant to me moving forward or not?
If Jack Welch's tenure was marked mostly by acquisitions, Jeff Immelt, on the other hand, felt the company needed to turn more inwards and grow organically through innovation. And realizing that he had to foster this new culture of innovation, he tapped you as their new chief marketing officer. It was a huge promotion, and I think there had not been a CMO at GE for like 2 decades.
Right.
You didn't have any formal marketing background. So why you? What is it Jeff saw in Beth?
Yeah, I've actually asked him that in the years after. One, I'd come out of NBC and I had done advertising, so it was close, right? It was promotion, and I came out of media. And most people think that's all marketing is anyway. It's just kind of what you do at the end. It's the ad, it's the trade show. But Jeff had grown up in GE and actually had started in the job he was putting in the department that I would be leading. So he had a different vision for it. And I think he saw in me a risk taker. There were a couple of other things we had done. I had brought in a cultural anthropologist who put us through a really kind of crazy process as we were looking to rebrand the company. He saw me taking risks that I think he was hoping more people would do.
Well, Jeff clearly had a ton of confidence in you, but there seems to be a period of time where maybe you didn't have as much confidence in yourself. A few months into the role, you mentioned that Jeff called you into his office to give you some direct feedback that you needed to be more confident. So I'm curious, why the lack of confidence, and how were you able to turn that around?
Yeah, he did. He called me into his office and he said, look, I don't know what's going on with you, but I expect you to put it out more. You need more confidence. You're in this job for a reason. I need a point of view from you.
How did that lack of confidence manifest itself? Like, where was that coming from?
Yeah, we would show up and, we'd have meetings, and I guess he was looking for me to take a risk, be provocative, say that's crazy, here's a better idea. I was not confident in this new marketing role because I didn't come with a traditional MBA marketing cred. I was hiring a lot of people who did have that, but that wasn't me. So there was that natural uncertainty about being in a new job. And I just think confidence is something I've always struggled with. And he called me out on it.
Well, you had mentioned in the book that you're also an introvert by nature. Are those two in any way related?
Yes and no. I think the introversion for me is something I've also struggled with in the sense that I'm just naturally quiet. I reserve my energy. I'm not the loudest. At least I didn't used to be the loudest voice in a room. And so that one fueled on the other because I was more reserved. I wouldn't put an idea out there. I wouldn't challenge someone. And when you got to overcome that, and then you're also not feeling confident about an area of expertise. And so he called me on it. And I remember thinking, oh gosh, like I thought I was doing my best Meryl Streep. Like how did he figure that out? I'm acting well here, but I had to fix it. And so, it's sort of my little method for me of just giving myself small challenges. And I'd make sure in the next meeting I came in with an idea. I challenged someone. I just was more confident. And out of that, I think is a really good lesson. I actually use this with people I coach or advise sometimes. Just, I have confidence in you. Why don't you? I want you to take a chance on yourself. Like, it's also a little bit like, I'm sure he was thinking like, don't make me a dope. Like, I have confidence in you. Should I? So, in some ways, your lack of confidence challenges their lack of confidence a little. Challenges their confidence a little bit.
You refer to this research in the book that shows that success correlates as closely with confidence as it does competence. So once you're able to take in Jeff's feedback, did you find that to be the case at GE? That confidence was as, if not more important than competence? Sure.
I find that in every arena. It's the old fake it till you make it, but some people just fake it their whole careers, right? And look, GE has amazing people who work there, and I was so privileged. some of the biggest brains I've worked with. But you also, in every company, you work with people who are really good at the confidence game, and maybe they're not quite as good as they could be because they talk a good game. They can pitch any idea to anybody, but when you peel it back, you're like, well, what are they really talking about?
There's no substance.
Yeah, I think you have to really be thoughtful about this. And the fake it till you make it advice is helpful, but it assumes you have a level of competence. You can't just fake it without knowing what you're doing or willing to learn and figure it out. I did not have an MBA in marketing. I did not go into the CMO role. In fact, Ad Age wrote, one of the rare breed of marketers with no marketing background. And fair, right? Fair. And that meant I had to learn. I had to take my first 90 to 100 days and go to people and say, teach me, help me. I had to be nothing but a sponge to learn. If I had walked into that job, I had to be confident about not knowing. But if I had walked in like, I read Phil Kotler's textbook, now I know everything I need to know about marketing, I think I would have been called out pretty quickly. And so I think that's the tension that you're navigating in those situations.
Well, you're next tasked with leading GE's new innovation incubator called Imagination Breakthroughs. This would be the process to incubate new business ideas that would eventually need to turn into billions of dollars of revenue. But it wasn't so easy. It sounds like there was a lot of internal resistance. So why the pushback, and how do you overcome that?
Yeah, I feel like some respects as I was working with my agent on my book, she's like, well, wait a minute, every chapter's starting to sound the same. People don't like the idea. A team comes together. You struggle. There's some triumph and not. And I'm like, well, that's kind of it. And we do it over and over and over again. And this was one of my first introductions to that because we had declared in GE marketing's important. And marketing is about organic growth, new revenue from new sources. And the culture was like, what? Like, we haven't had marketing for 20 years. And if we had it, it was advertising. So what? What are you saying? And we just had this vision. Marketing's about what you do in the beginning of the process also. It's about living in the market. It's where change and innovation happens. And it's a market-backed force. And so how do we prove that? So we created this program called Imagination Breakthroughs. And it was really just an accelerator and incubator of internal ideas that were focused on that kind of market-backed thinking. And I'll give you a really good example. Many of them were not particularly imaginative or breakthrough, but it was a way to also say, use your imagination to look at how a marketing-led innovation effort could be. So one of my favorite ones was really simple, but our CMO at Energy basically resegmented the Middle East region and found new customer segments to serve with existing products and to serve existing customers with new products. That meant We had to realign some salespeople. We had to reconfigure some of the offers, but it wasn't a huge investment of time or money. And over a 3-year period, he identified, and I think almost close to captured, $200 million of new revenue to GE. That got people's attention. Oh, that's what you do. So we created that as this kind of protected class of ideas where we were trying to push more market back, customer kind of driven innovation. Again, it sounds so simple, but when you're in a tech company where you do a lot of internal product development out of your labs or engineering feats of magic, sometimes you forget to query the market. You maybe put too many features in. You over-engineer it, and it's too expensive and maybe only serves one segment when it could serve other segments. So that's part of what we were trying to show, was that there was also an additional way to innovate and drive new revenue.
Well, there's certainly the low-hanging fruit, which is what you're alluding to.
Yeah.
But you're not giving yourself enough credit here, because out of this project, there was this new formal process they've never had before of innovation budgeting where 5 to 10% of a business unit's resources had to stem from disruptive ideas, not just continuous like you're alluding to, but disruptive ideas that may take years and years to materialize. That's a pretty monumental shift from this previous culture of efficiency and small incremental changes.
Yeah, exactly. And thanks for pointing out, Glenn. It's exactly what happened. I mean, you needed the training wheels, so the simple stuff that you could prove this is what we do. And then we graduated to more breakthrough technologies and taking more risk. One of my favorite ones out of our healthcare business, looking at stem cell technology, which was very risky, especially then, and looking at, when babies are born, creating a bank of the blood from their baby's umbilical cord, the mother's umbilical cord, and storing it. And now we take that for granted, but our healthcare team really pushed into that. And out of that, a whole new cell therapy business was born in GE Healthcare that I think today is pretty much the future of GE's healthcare business. So that took about 15 years for that to be realized. And it required a really brave marketing leader to protect that, to fight for it, to make sure the right scientists and salespeople were in there. But it was only as we got the confidence that this marketer should even be in the room having those discussions that the funding came and that his business leaders protected him. So really what that process gave us were examples, confidence, and kind of a testing ground for people to understand really as a disciplined approach to seeding and really protecting ideas. To me, imagination breakthroughs became protected class of ideas. When the efficiency, machine comes along hungry for its quarterly earnings and its quarterly targets, you say, no, go eat somewhere else because you're not gonna take out this. We're protecting this.
So on a related note, you say that management can often kill innovation by over-reliance of the scientific method, by demanding innovators to prove it before it can even be understood. So to be innovative, you have to learn to be comfortable with some kind of maybe. These are your words. Could you unpack that for me?
Yeah, well, I do think that's one of the challenges of business today, because you have every business, I hope, has some recognition of the short and long-term tension. Just in its nature, there's tension there. And what always makes people nervous about the future and about moving forward or imagining it forward, as I call it, is you don't know. Prove it to me. Prove that idea is going to work. I once had a business leader when I was at NBC. We were doing a lot of disruptive digital, and he looked at me and he said, I don't care about any of the stuff you're saying. Just guarantee me it's going to make $500 million and you can go. Well, no. Okay. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. So it is that guarantee, that risk-free proposition. I want, it's like a vending machine. I often felt this way as somebody pushing for innovation, like I was a vending machine, like, okay, A4 pretzels, and out the bottom comes $500 million. And it's just that easy, and it's all fully baked, and we have no question our beautiful business plan will be exactly as we say. And you see later in the book, it finally took certainly me several years, if not a decade, to kind of work through some of this stuff. But every business, when you're looking at innovation, I guarantee you most people who are listening to this have seen this, where you have a hockey stick business plan where, you're like struggling for the first 3 to 5 years maybe, or whatever your relative period is. And at some inflection point, growth just goes, it's like a hockey stick. Growth just in your plan goes to the moon. Well, really, I've seen so many business plans now that they all look that way. And so why are we even kidding ourselves? We know when we get to that inflection point, it rarely, in hindsight, they never look that way. And yet we still do it. We still waste our time having business reviews. We still do strategic plans and believe at year 3, we are going to have exponential growth. And year 3 comes along and the customers we thought were going to be there aren't. The profitability we assumed were going to be there because we don't know how to deal with uncertainty. And we use our math models of the past to assume that it's going to be the same in the future. So I just feel like I learned a lot of that's just a waste of time, and you got to get out there and try things. And yes, you have to measure people, and yes, you have to have some kind of metrics, but they're not the metrics of the certainty, that's for sure.
Well, it's interesting because GE owned NBC, and NBC, a studio, is pretty much in the hits-driven business. So they know that of X number of pilots they do, only Y% are actually going to make it. And you've got, just like the venture capital world, you've got a very small percent of your new ideas that are going to pretty much drive the bulk of your profits. And GE's culture was pretty antithetical to that, right? It's almost like they wanted every single idea to be a material business, like you said, that's going to have X billions of revenue in Y period of time. So I guess it was pretty difficult to take that culture and that business model of the media business and adopt that to GE's culture.
Well, it's interesting you're asking that because I didn't find NBC any less risk averse. I didn't find NBC or the media world to be more willing to take risk than I did at GE, to be really honest with you. In fact, personally, I found GE a more creative platform for me, which is, people don't really believe I would say that. But so what you're saying about NBC is they were, and really media has become this a lot, especially the studio business, where all they need are a couple of big hits. It's kind of like a venture capital model where you just need like one big tentpole movie to return the whole fund, if you will. But there is so much nervousness about the genre, the style. That's why so many things look the same. That's why so many of the media properties all try to copy with a slight twist. I mean, I love late night comedy, but really, has anyone innovated the late night comedy genre at all? Like maybe, look, they don't even not wear a tie. They all wear ties, for crying out loud. They all have a sidekick. They all have a band. And yes, it's inherent on the talent. Some are inherently better than others, but the format's not really very risk taking. And you might say, well, the viewers don't like it that way. But I would argue that I would also say you needed some bold, courageous media executives who had the patience and the courage to back some things that were a little strange and weird in the early days to push for new genres. So yes, there was some risk taking, some big, bet the fund kind of thinking, but it was always very careful, very derivative, very much copycat. And I kind of think that set the stage for what we've seen with the Netflix and some of the other, in its day it was cable. And I actually worry on Netflix's behalf. They start to be the incumbent. They start to do things the same way. What are they doing to disrupt themselves? And it's not even disrupt themselves, just to take some risks. As you get bigger, as you get more certain with what works, hopefully they're asking themselves right now, what risks are we really taking? And if they're not, we should be worried as viewers and certainly worried as investors.
Well, just sticking with NBC for the moment, and I should mention that you had gone from GE over to NBC and then back to GE.
Yeah, it's hard to, I can barely make sense of it. But it's fair to say I was back and forth those two places quite a bit.
Well, at NBC, under your direction, you formed a joint venture with News Corp to start a media streaming company called Hulu, which of course would go on to become a wild success. I'm curious, why was it so important to start this as a separate entity with its own entrepreneurial CEO versus incubating it internally? Like, what does that say about corporate innovation if you've got to almost source talent from the outside and keep it outside?
Yeah, well, just to set the stage, I had also been part of acquiring iVillage, which was a women's-based community that had a beautiful strategy for community-based, basic community on the internet combined with content. And, you know, I'd love to think we had our shot at Facebook. Certainly Facebook wasn't even Facebook then. So the strategy was beautiful, but we bombed. We bombed with it because of all the things that happen when companies bring in new teams and new ideas. Organ rejection. And so I think that was a really horrible experience, but it was incredibly insightful for me and the team that I worked with at NBC to say, like, well, we really can mess things up when we try to do it ourselves. And so when Hulu, the idea of Hulu came around, at first there was a lot of that internal, like, we're going to build our own streaming service and no one's going to be able to, you have to come here to stream it. And it was such that, you know, walled garden concept at the time. It was so closed. It was just so like, we're going to protect ourselves. And it was really about revenue and IP. It wasn't about the user experience. So we could just see all that happening again and again. And keep in mind that News Corp Fox had just come off of something similar. They had acquired MySpace. I mean, remember MySpace?
I do.
And they had a similar thing. They basically were in the process of killing it too. And so I think collectively our teams both realized, like, okay, there's got to be a better way. And so we were panicked about YouTube and streaming video enough to say, let's get together. Let's create something outside the mothership. And I think, you know, the best thing that the collective team did was to realize we needed a real entrepreneurial spirit to run it. And so we hired Jason Kilar to be the founder of Hulu. And thank God we did. I know we would have killed it. I mean, here's an example of why I know. The team I worked with at the time in NBC, we were doing streaming video on our different websites. And the tech team had built this beautiful video player. It was beautiful. It was $5 million, which is a lot today. And it was even a lot back then. But it was clunky. It had all kinds of bells and whistles just because we could. So Jason Kilar comes in and we're like, well, good. Great news is we've got a video player for you. So you don't have to use any of your budget. We're going to just give you this video player. And he goes, oh my God, it looks like, you know, Tokyo lit up at night. Are you kidding? It's horrible. It wasn't even called Hulu, and there's no streaming video user that would ever use that thing. I'm not going to take it. And he didn't. He built his own because it was the fundamental technology of the offer. Had Jason been hired by NBC or Fox to be inside and launching that video streaming service, he would have been forced to use the video player. He would have ticked off viewers before he even got started. That's what companies do. That's what we were trying to avoid.
So I got to bring up one other interesting story from NBC. And keep in mind the context here. You're at GE. You had done all these amazing things. I mean, you're making this elephant dance. It's incredible. And, you know, NBC was quite a different culture. You know, Bob Wright, who was CEO at NBC, you know, knew about you and asked you to come over to oversee the network's digital transformation. But you found yourself often at odds with a particular executive there. I'll leave him anonymous unless you want to bring up who it is. You do mention him in the book.
And we'll keep the suspense going. Someone can read it in the book.
Well, the tension culminated in his office one day when you had put your foot down insisting that he support you with some cost-cutting initiative, I believe. And his face had turned bright red. He walked over to where you were sitting, physically lifted you up by the collar, walked you over to the door, and screamed at you to get out. And I'm like, wow, it's almost too crazy for a movie script. What the heck did you say? What was it all about?
I was just stunned. I don't know. I was just stunned. He was so angry with me, and for good reason. It was a very competitive environment. I was put in there to drive change. There was a bit of a perceived horse race that several of us were up for Bob Wright's job. And it was a threatening time for a lot of people. And he had just had it with me. And here I was asking to change some stuff with somebody he was a big champion of, somebody who was on my team, mind you, but he was protecting him. And, I probably didn't do it in the most effective way either. I challenged him and he felt challenged and he shooed me out of his office in a pretty aggressive way. And I was just so stunned that I didn't know what to do. I remember he had a number of assistants who worked with him and they were just sitting there and in their desks, and I like come out like a cartoon, like, I don't know, like Bugs Bunny or something, I just or the Roadrunner. So it was just awkward. And I kind of looked at them shocked. They looked at me like, I don't know if that happened every day or it was just one of those. And so I went back to my office and I cried. I was just so frustrated because I didn't stand up for myself in that moment. I didn't say, wait a minute, look, we're trying to get to the same result, which is we love this company. We want to see something happen. This is not the way to deal with it. And I didn't do it. It was only in hindsight I thought of like great retorts or that I learned I really needed to build that relationship. And I think had we both worked on building that relationship and not let the challenge and tension get to us, we both would have come to a different place. But what I also honestly didn't like as much about media, and I love media. I mean, I love that industry, but it's kind of a me industry in that everybody's sort of out for themselves by default. It's harder to build the vision of a mission. People love the industry so much. They love story. They love all that goes with it. And I had seen a different way at GE. I had seen more mission-based, more customer-focused. And so that was also happening there where people tended to protect themselves first. And I fell right into it. And that's the way it was. I'm not proud of it, but that's what happened.
Well, let's get back to GE. One of the biggest breakthroughs you had that you actually led was Ecomagination. So what exactly was that, and why was it so critical for GE's future?
Well, Ecomagination was a big project for me personally. I mean, it's how I ended up back at NBC because it was this big change for GE. And I think we were successful kind of changing GE to mean green energy as much as General Electric. And that took about a decade, but it was disruptive because one, GE had been kind of fighting the EPA for an issue in the Hudson River where there were some chemicals that had been legally released, but nonetheless the EPA declared needed to be taken out. And it was a big battle and, kind of pit NGOs against GE. And we were coming off of that. And here I was saying, not only are we going to work with the people who've been criticizing us, but we're going to invest in this technology that could disrupt the centralized utility model that for 100 years has been successful. And it was a team of us that came together. We heard our customers saying, hey, this is happening in Europe and other parts of the world. Regulation is changing, demanding cleaner technology. GE, we need your help. We saw it in the energy business. We saw it in the rail business. We saw it in the aviation business. So we saw enough pattern recognition to feel confident that that world was unfolding and that we had an opportunity, and indeed our customers needed our help getting there. So that helped. But it was something we really worked for. We put a stealth kind of challenger team together to kind of challenge the way the existing model. We found we had already great R&D, already great products, already in the market that were cleaner, greener. We came up with a value proposition that was for our customers. It can't just be about green. It has to be about both kinds of green, like the economy and the ecology.
Well, and that's the point. It wasn't just a nice to have in terms of for the environment. It's a values-based thing. This is also what's good for the business.
Yeah, exactly. And it took us a while to get to that point. And I think that's what made it credible from a business perspective is we could show a path to revenue, and we brought our customers in and worked with them. But it was risky because people, again, were afraid. They were afraid we were going to disrupt our business. They were afraid our customers were going to walk away. And in fact, a couple of them did. I didn't know it until later. They were afraid we were going to be embarrassed. So again, the fear was real. I want that to be conveyed. There were good reasons why people feared it, but there were also good reasons why we could feel confident that that future was unfolding.
Well, so all this amazing innovation work that you had done, you had an admirer, a little entrepreneur sitting a few thousand miles away by the name of Steve Jobs, tried to convince you, practically begged you to come to Apple, reporting directly to him, and you turned him down. If I recall, not once, but twice. Not a lot of people say no to Jobs, especially with an opportunity like that. Why did you?
Well, the first job that was offered wasn't for him, but he did weigh in as part of the courting process. It was to work in the iTunes team. And then the second time he called with a interesting job offer that was tied to some environmental efforts he wanted Apple to be in, and he had seen my work there. And at the time I got to know Apple and him a little bit. I was at NBC and in a job that was really tough. So it was very tempting. And keep in mind, he was Steve Jobs, but he wasn't the Steve Jobs at this point. Apple had not yet, they had introduced, streaming video. They had iTunes platform clearly, but they hadn't really revolutionized the phone and the app economy that we've come to know so well. And I remember at one point when the courting process was going on and him saying, we're going to be really big. We're just about to take off. And me thinking, like, how big can they really be? But look, at the end of the day, it just didn't feel like the job that I wanted to take. I didn't want to move my family. That was part of the reason. But I also, at the time, I liked media. I liked content. I saw them as a technology company. I wanted to be a content person. And I'll be honest, I was a bit afraid. And I said no. And I had good reasons for saying no, and I actually kept my little sheet. I still have it, my sheet for the yes, the no. I have this whole little process when I'm trying to make a decision like that. So it weighed on me, and there were many times I regretted that decision. Certainly when I saw Apple's success, but I also know Jobs had a reputation eventually for, tough, but pushing people to be better. And so I regretted I didn't have that opportunity, but in the end, it was the right move for me. I had to make it the right move. I didn't do it, right? So yeah, I think I put it in the book because I felt less like, hey, this was Steve Jobs, but more like you got to know what your goal is, what's right for you. But also, if I'm honest, there was also fear, confidence challenges that I was still dealing with then.
One of the things you mentioned in the book is how whenever you're tasked with a new assignment, a new project, that you start looking outside the four walls of GE. You look for examples all across industries and try to find patterns and see what you could use to rethink GE and the businesses they're in. But you often struggle to have Jeff and the other business unit leaders understand this future you're envisioning. They had a hard time grasping the analog you were presenting. As an example, we're talking about Apple. You would talk about Apple's app ecosystem and, how that could apply to GE, what that means in terms of having an ecosystem like that and how other companies can plug in. And so you attributed this to a common cognitive bias called functional fixedness. Could you explain what that is?
I borrowed it from a number of futurists, especially Edie Weiner, who I've known over the years. But I think it's just this idea that we kind of know so much, we can't imagine that we don't know everything. And so meanwhile, stuff's happening all around us that doesn't fit our view of the way the future is going. And so this idea for us when we were looking at digital for industry, this notion that, well, apps on an iPhone, that's a consumer application. What does that ever have to do with a jet engine? So you get functionally fixed in some respects that says, well, that's consumer, that's for them. We're different. And yes, you're different, but what can you learn from that? And, so we struggled a lot to culturally, kept using the, iPhone app, situation as the platform model to explain the future of digital. And we'd have violent debates with our colleagues. It was like, they couldn't get past but we're not a consumer company. I had the same thing with driverless cars. When we'd start to talk about driverless cars, but Beth, we don't make cars. Yeah, but play it forward. Imagine it forward. Planes almost fly themselves. Trains can drive themselves. What might that mean for us? And so partly that's what you're functionally fixed. You're like, yeah, but we're not a consumer company. But at the same time, and I share this in this digital story, what you have to realize too is that sometimes, yes, you are different And that means the exact same model that you're trying to use to drive change needs to be adapted. So take the iPhone model for industrial. Well, there were security issues. There were data issues. Lufthansa doesn't want to share their data with United Airlines if they don't have to. And we couldn't just assume that the same rules of the consumer internet were going to work for the industrial internet. So we had to listen to that too. So anyway, I use that, like, even when you're driving change, sometimes you can get functionally fixed in this new model, and you have to spend some time kind of unpacking those things.
Moving on the same theme in terms of trying to change the culture and rethink how business is done. One of the many ways, again, that you would reshape culture was creating this process called Fastworks, which leveraged the lean startup methodology. Well, this notion of building a minimal viable product that a lot of us know about in the software world and the digital world, building this MVP and failing fast, it seems so antithetical to this old, stodgy manufacturing behemoth. So out of that, was there like one particular example where you could point to say, here's where we actually use that methodology to create something new, something innovative, and something eventually, monumental at GE?
Yeah, well, I think this notion of Fastworks, we incorporated lean startup. It's that ethos of just early experimentation and creating really a separate track. You've got your core business track, and there still needs to innovate there, but this is more the bigger leaps into the next and the new. And you have to plan for that. And it helped us start our venture team. It came up with a process to fund ideas at a stage gate kind of way. And to me, the most beautiful example of this is what our aviation business did to get into new models of manufacturing. So to embrace 3D printing in metals, they had to work this way. I love this as an example because it's one of the most highly regulated industries on earth for a good reason. They were basically saying this old part might have had 300 pieces that needed to be welded together. We're going to now do it with one part. And so they were fundamentally changing the physical structure of a part that flies us all safely at 36,000 feet. And they needed to bring teams together of designers and engineers, material scientists. They could not have gotten it done the old industrial way. They needed to test and learn. They needed a collaborative team. They needed kind of a skunkworks team, a challenger group that kind of tested these things. And then once they got it to a good place of scale, then a team that could take it and get it to work in every jet engine. They needed the FAA to work with them in this. They couldn't say, well, you're too stupid. You don't know progress. They had to work together to make that happen. I love that as an example. It's basically, I think, the future of manufacturing, and I think the aviation business at GE is poised to make that happen. It took a bold leader to do it. I found our aviation engineers some of the most inventive and open to change of any I've worked with. If you had a good idea, no matter where it came from, in fact, as we were testing methods, we did an open challenge to say, can someone print a part better in the world than we can? And the idea came from a 20-year-old science student in Indonesia. And the engineers at GE were open to say, yeah, he did this better than we can. What can we learn from him? So I love that as a real life learning lab in an industry that you would imagine would have a lot of excuses for why they can't do something differently.
So Beth, it's really fascinating to me. You've got this creative mindset with the guts to take bold risks, the ability to think outside the box, and the resilience to see it through. In other words, you've got this the perfect DNA for an entrepreneur. So looking back at your career, I'm curious, why did you choose the corporate entrepreneurial path versus the entrepreneurial one?
I believe entrepreneurs need to be everywhere. I believe we need them in every institution. If you're a teacher, you work for the government, work for the transportation authority, we need entrepreneurs who are challenging the way things have always been done. And I just believed in the mission of the company I worked for. GE does amazing things in the world. That was a mission I wanted to be part of. Why can't I do that there? That was always my thinking. And that was why I wrote the book. That's my message today. Like, your organization needs you to fight for the future and to fight for better ways. Like, if not, what's the future? So that was my mission, and I felt incredibly fulfilled. Yes, it was a struggle. No, I didn't like it all the time. Yes, I failed a lot. But as I looked back in the course of putting this book together, that's kind of what I do. That's kind of my thing.
I believe you were the first female vice chair in the history of GE. Does that have any special meaning to you?
At GE, the vice chair role was really kind of a capstone assignment, kind of recognition of a career. So I was quite honored by that because, one, I had a great champion in Jeff Immelt. I think for him it was symbolic. I mean, hopefully I earned it. But it was symbolic also to say, you can have a different path to get here. Not just the woman thing, but as a more, and I don't mean to, just not as a woman, let me rephrase that, but as also a creative person, an instigator, of a troublemaker, that we need those people too. So that's what I took from it, and it made me incredibly proud to represent that kind of difference in the company.
The name of this podcast is The Art of Excellence. What do you think of when you think of excellence?
Well, I think excellence is just, you keep going, you keep trying, you're never done. And it's frustrating because there's just always more to learn, always things to take you to a new level. So to me, excellence is just a never ending journey of learning and keep trying to get better.
That's great. Beth, you've had such a storied career. The book, I don't even know how to describe it. It's part memoir. It's a part how-to book on innovation, on marketing, on navigating corporate culture. It was a really powerful book on so many levels. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Highly recommend it. Thank you for doing this. I'm glad I got a chance to learn all about this story, and I wish you all the best in whatever the next chapter holds for you, and it's been a pleasure.
Well, me too, Glenn. Thanks. Your very thoughtful questions today. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for the feedback on the book. I put a lot of work into it. I'm happy to finally have it out into the world. And it is a different kind of book. I think people will find it's deeply personal and hopefully very practical.
And one last time, it's Imagine It Forward, Courage, Creativity, and the Power of Change. Thanks so much, Beth.
Thanks, Glenn. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. You can subscribe to the show at iTunes, Stitcher, and theartofexcellence.com. I've got one small favor to ask. If you like the show, please take a minute and leave us a review on iTunes. I would really appreciate that. I'll see you next time.